There's a haunting pattern that surfaces when we look closely at mass violence. And it's easy to label as rage or as hatred or as unchecked aggression. And yes, it is rage. It's definitely hatred, most surely aggression. But underneath the explosion, underneath the destruction, I think if we listen carefully, there's a quieter and more devastating whisper that says, I want to be loved. I want to be seen. Mass violence can look like a last distorted love letter to a world that ignored the sender for far too long. Behind the pain is this longing to matter. You see, from the moment that we're born, we're wired to seek connection, where we cry and someone will pick us up, right? We smile and usually someone smiles back. We reach out and someone holds out their hand. But when the reaching is met with emptiness, when the cries echo without answer, when the smiles go unseen, the ache does not disappear. It grows, it festers, and it twists into something else. And this conviction that the only way to matter is to break something that's too big to ignore. See, we're not just social creatures, we're creatures of recognition, we're creatures of remembrance. And if we cannot be remembered for our kindness, if we cannot be loved for our presence, well, some will just settle for being remembered for their destruction. And it's not because they want to harm, I think. I think it's because they want to exist, even if it's in the most tragic way possible. But you see, long before the explosion happened was this long silence. Mass violence that does not usually emerge from like sudden anger. It builds slowly and quietly, like a slow drip that's filling an invisible cup. And most of the men who commit mass violence have been walking invisibly among us for years, ignored and mocked and forgotten and rejected. Not always by individuals, but by the culture at large, by the relentless message that says, you're only valuable if you're successful, right? Or you're only lovable if you're attractive. Or you're only enough if you have something to show for it. For some, there is no path to enoughness. There's no doorway to love. There's no safe place to be seen as human and hurting and still worthy. So they become invisible long before they ever became violent. And invisibility is its own kind of violence. It wounds quietly, it starves the soul, and it leaves a person convinced that annihilation is the only language left. But here's what happens when love turns into a weapon. You see, for someone who has felt unloved for too long, love itself can start feeling like a weapon. Not because love is violent, but because the absence of love feels unbearable. The longer they are denied it, the more they turn against it. And eventually the ache to be loved becomes indistinguishable from the desire to hurt. So they lash out, not because they don't know love, but because they believe that love is unreachable. And if they can't have it, then they'll punish the world that made it feel impossible. And what looks like indiscriminate rage, in many ways, is just highly targeted pain, aiming it at the very society that convinced them that they were unworthy of connection. Mass violence becomes this message that says, you will remember me and you will not ignore me, and you will know that I was here. I mean, it's a tragic, twisted form of longing, yes. A longing that was never properly met and never properly healed. But there's also this cultivation of alienation in the midst of this. You see, alienation is more than loneliness. Loneliness may say, I miss being connected, but alienation says, I don't belong anywhere and I never will belong anywhere. It's a deeper wound, a wound not just of isolation, but also of erasure altogether. And many who turn to mass violence have spent years feeling alienated from community, alienated from family, alienated from their peers, from the institutions that they were a part of. Alienation tells a brutal story. It says, You're not one of us. You don't fit here. You are unwanted. And because belonging is not a luxury, I think it's a biological and emotional need, the absence of belonging is devastating. When belonging becomes unattainable, some abandon the pursuit of it altogether. They stop reaching out. They stop believing in bridges. They turn that pain inward until it bursts in outward expression. And the tragedy is not just that they hurt others, it's also that they once wanted to be a part of the very world that they ended up destroying. But there's a fantasy of being seen as well we need to address. You see, in the minds of those who are planning violence, there's often this dangerous fantasy. And no, it's not just of causing pain, but of being seen, like finally seen. So they imagine the headlines, the face of the strangers uttering their name. They imagine the recognition that they never got while they were alive. And now they're just pouring it out in death. In this fantasy, they become significant. Not for kindness, though, not for contribution, but significant for chaos. And it's not joy that they're looking for, it's validation. And it's tragic because the need to be known is so deeply human. But when it's starved for too long, that need rots. It twists into a hunger that no amount of fame or infamy can actually satisfy. They think that they're writing a final chapter that will correct a lifetime of invisibility. But all it does is it confirms their loneliness that they've carried from the very beginning. See, love and destruction are like two sides of longing. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. And mass violence is not born from pure hatred. It's born from a life that is felt devoid of mattering. Hatred becomes the only language that's left when tenderness feels unavailable. And destruction becomes the only action that promises to be unforgettable. But if we pull back the curtain, we'll see that love and destruction aren't opposites from them, they're twins. They're different expressions of the same unmet longing. If I can't be loved, then at least I'll be feared. If I can't be included, at least I'll be unavoidable. If I can't be celebrated, I'll be infamous. And this is not to excuse the harm, no. And it's not to pacify, but to understand the roots. Because until we recognize what loneliness can mutate into, we'll keep pretending that violence erupts out of nowhere. And it doesn't. It grows silently in rooms where people feel unseen or unheard or unloved. But shame is a silent architect behind it all. If loneliness is the soil, shame is really that architect. And shame says, you're not just alone, but you actually deserve to be alone. Or you're not just struggling, you are the struggle. Or you're not just unwanted, you are actually unworthy. See, shame personalizes that isolation. It takes the external reality, like disconnection, and then it internalizes it. You're not alone because you are broken, right? And when shame saturates the heart, it doesn't just hurt. It convinces the person that they are unfixable or unreachable or unlovable. And from that dark place, anything can feel justified, even destruction, even devastation. Because if you believe that you're already ruined, well, why not ruin what rejected you? Shame doesn't just silence, shame corrodes. It eats away at empathy until the only relationship that feels safe is with one's own anger. But there's a role of integrity and intimacy that we should be talking about. See, what stands between a hurting person and devastation is not more rules, not louder punishments, but it's integrity and intimacy. Integrity asks, can I stay aligned with my own humanity, even when the whole world feels inhuman? Can I act from truth instead of from my wounds? And intimacy offers a different consideration. It says, can I let someone see the parts of me that I'm afraid are unlovable? Can I risk being known before I give up on being known? Integrity grounds a person in their inherent worth, whereas intimacy gives them evidence that they are not alone. And without these two, isolation begins to harden. Without these two, shame metastasizes. And without these two, despair turns into destruction. But here's how society misses these early warnings. We often look at acts of mass violence and we ask, how did no one see this coming, right? And the answer is complex, yes. But at the heart of it lies this. We don't just miss the anger, we actually miss the absence long before the anger came on the scene. We miss the loneliness. We miss the disengagement. We miss the slow withdrawal from relational spaces. We miss the kids sitting alone at lunchtime every day, for example. We miss the man who stops trying to make friends because it's too painful. We miss the woman whose sadness curdles into bitterness because hope felt like a lie too many times. And we're trained to notice disruptions, yes, but we often overlook the disappearances. And disappearance is the soil where devastation grows. See, by the time someone explodes, the world has been losing them for years. And so loneliness is like a ticking clock, if you will. Loneliness is not static. It doesn't just sit quietly in the background of life. It's building, and it's compounding, and it's corroding. And left untreated, loneliness becomes despair. And despair, when it's paired with shame and alienation, becomes volatile. The longer someone feels unseen, the louder their need to be acknowledged becomes. And if no one meets need with care, or patience, or presence, they will find other ways to demand attention. And violence is never just about the moment that it erupts in. It's about all of those unnoticed moments that preceded it. Loneliness is not harmless. It's a ticking clock. And we need to remember that belonging is not a luxury, it's survival. We often treat belonging like it's optional, right? Like it's the icing on the cake of life. But belonging is as necessary as water, as air, as food. When we belong, we thrive. But when we don't, we begin to decay from the inside out. And mass violence is often perpetrated by those who have lived without true belonging for years, and sometimes even decades. It's not about being popular, it's about being seen as a person. It's about being recognized as someone who matters, not because of achievements, looks, or your wealth, but because you exist. And so we underestimate how vital it is to be a part of we. And when that we never materializes, isolation can curdle into devastation. But the final gesture is visibility at any cost. See, for some, the violence becomes the final attempt to finally be acknowledged. If they couldn't be loved, they'll settle for being noticed. And if they couldn't belong, they'll settle for being infamous. If they couldn't find connection, they'll settle for attention. It's a brutal trade, one that harms not just the victims, but the perpetrators themselves, who believed in their final moments that this was the only way to be real in the eyes of a world that had long ignored them. When love seems inaccessible, destruction becomes a last resort for recognition. But that's not love. It's not even connection. That's the echo of what should have been possible all along. But there's a really slow work of prevention I want to just address here. What can we do in the meantime? How do we prevent this devastation from the isolation? I think the answer is not glamorous. It's not fast, it's not simple. It's really slow and patient work of building cultures where people are seen early, where vulnerability is met with compassion, not ridicule, where disconnection is addressed long before it hardens into despair. Integrity, you see, is taught as living aligned with your own truth, even when a connection feels risky, that's a missing component. And where intimacy is practiced, not as performance, but as mutual seeing. Where prevention is not one giant act, but it's like thousands of small acts of recognition. It's like a teacher noticing a withdrawn student, or a friend checking in without any judgment at all, right? It's like a neighbor who chooses to see instead of dismiss. But prevention looks like daring to build bridges before someone believes burning them is the only option. But here's what it really means to see someone, though. To really see someone is more than just looking at them. It's noticing them. It's recognizing their pain before that calcifies into bitterness. It's naming their worth before they believe they have none left. It's not fixing. It's not saving it. It's just your presence saying, I see you. I see your pain. I see your need. And you're not alone. Real seeing is the antidote to the kind of isolation that metastasizes into violence. And it costs time. It costs attention. It costs emotional labor. But it saves lives. Not physically, but relationally, emotionally, spiritually. And you can see integrity as this act of resistance, because choosing integrity, like choosing to live in alignment with your truth, even when you feel invisible, is a form of resistance. It's refusing to let shame rewrite your story. It's refusing to let isolation dictate your actions. It's refusing to believe the lie that hurting others is the only way to be seen. Integrity is not passive. It's the courageous decision to stay whole in a world that fractures people through neglect and indifference. And when a person holds on to their humanity, even when humanity feels far away, they interrupt a cycle of despair by turning it into destruction. But integrity says, I will not become what hurt me. I will not repeat the wound. I will not settle for being remembered by breaking what I once longed to belong to. And then intimacy is this beautiful expression of redemption. Intimacy, like the real, honest, and mutual connection, is what redeems isolation. It's what softens the shame. It's what rewires the narrative of unworthiness. But intimacy is not given, it's built. It's built brick by brick, like moment by moment, small risks and tiny truths at a time. It begins not with a massive vulnerability, but with small disclosures. Saying things like, I'm struggling today. I feel invisible sometimes. I'm not okay, but I'm here. See, real intimacy grows when people feel safe enough to bring their whole selves into a relationship without the fear or rejection or the ridicule. When intimacy is possible, violence feels less necessary, because being seen for who you are is far more satisfying than being noticed for what you destroy. But change in the story is possible. See, if mass violence is a distorted love letter, then the way forward is to write a different story. Letter of presence, story of care, a story that has recognition infused. We cannot undo the tragedies that have already happened, but we can change the soil where the next tragedy could take root. And that's by building cultures that see before they judge, that listen before they dismiss, that connect before they correct. And the question is not just how do we stop the violence, but the question is, how do we build belonging before loneliness metastasizes? And it starts with how we see the unseen, how we love the unloved, how we remember the forgotten. Here's some final thoughts I want to share with you. Mass violence is not just about guns or laws or policies. It's about what happens when human beings believe that they are ghosts, when that happens long before they die. It's about what happens when longing festers into bitterness, and when rage comes from longing. And because Because when you hit this moment, there's not much more we can do. Not once it's too late. But now there is an opportunity before the invisibility writes its next letter in blood, before another lonely soul decides that the only way to matter is to destroy. The invitation is this. And it's not an easy invitation. It's not a glamorous one. But here's this invitation I have for you. Notice the quiet ones. Listen to the angry ones. Sit with the ones who are in pain and are hurting. And choose to be present over performing. Offer the dignity that they haven't experienced before judgment comes in its place. If we can be the ones who dare to see, we can be the ones who interrupt this cycle. If we can be the ones who love with integrity, we can be the ones who heal what shame tried to destroy. And this isn't about saving the world all at once. It's about saving one unseen person at a time, starting with ourselves. We got this.